All right, guys, today we are joined with Norma Chu. She is the founder and CEO of DDC. Norma, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be
Of
here.
course. Absolutely. Now, jumping right in, can you walk us through DDC's evolution from a leading Asian food platform to now a pioneer in corporate Bitcoin treasuries and how that dual focus creates some synergies for your shareholders?
So truly, I built this business for about 13 years, and over the years, it evolved from content creation to content commerce, and then a few years ago, we started launching our own branded food business. I listed the company on the New York Stock Exchange in November 2023, and was fortunate enough that I was catching up with one of my really early investor summer of last year, around September. I was telling him how excited I was because I was also looking to acquire another food brand here in the US. He has been investing in DDC for the past 10 years, and he himself is a Bitcoiner. And so he pointed to me and say, Norma, you've been a fantastic CEO, very hardworking for the past 10 years. I've observed your journey. But he suggested for me to think outside of the box and really pointed me to the direction of understanding the whole strategy playbook in terms of how to run a Bitcoin treasury company. So that was, my very first, I would say, orange pill for DDC to look into acquiring or adopting this strategy for the company. And I think, this dual focus of, running a profitable operating business underneath is a very good foundation for a company to adopt a Bitcoin accumulation strategy. Not only are we generating positive cash flow, we can also allocate cash flow to acquiring more Bitcoin, which is, in our view, the best asset for a treasury for any company, private and public. It definitely creates a very good virtuous cycle for value creation for our shareholders.
That's really neat. And how has this pivot towards Bitcoin impacted DDC's overall business operations and those revenue streams?
It's been very positive. If you look at our share price performance since we adopted the Bitcoin treasury earlier this year in May, I think both our existing and new investors believe in our vision for the company going forward. And we've gone from, I think when we first launched this strategy, probably around $3, $4 per share, as high as $20 around summertime. So I think that's been, positively received by the market. In terms of, performance, we've announced our results for the first half of 2025 a couple months ago. We recorded record high earnings, $5.23 million in net profit for the first half of the year, of which 3.8 million came from adjustment in fair value for digital assets on the balance sheet. So stripping aside the fair value gains from owning Bitcoin on our balance sheets, we also made about 1.5 million net profit from the operating business. So, I think looking at the whole year for 2025, we're really excited that we have, the underlying core business continues to grow and generate positive cash flow and net profit. But on top of that, we also now have a very, strong, exciting assets as Bitcoin as part of our Bitcoin treasury.
And you mentioned that kind of range in your stock price there, down a few dollars to highs over $20. What key lessons have you learned about kind of managing investor expectations, especially in a crypto influenced market that can see some volatility?
Yeah, I think is often difficult to predict market directions, and it's hard to kind of tell exactly what investors should expect or could expect in terms of share price movements. But I think for us, or for myself, the first thing is really to share with our existing investor what our view is for Bitcoin and why we believe it is the best asset to add to the company's balance sheet. And just sharing that long-term view and the benefits of owning Bitcoin, I think that gives them a very good understanding in terms of why we add this very big strategic change to the company. And it's all just about, I think, providing transparency and ongoing communication with all of our stakeholders. And if you look in the past, 5, 6 months, I've written and published a few, not only my Bitcoin manifesto when we first adopted the strategy, but also a couple of shareholder letters to all of our stakeholders to explain, why we make certain bigger strategic moves. So I think having these type of clarity and providing, our thought process, our strategy, our vision, and our goals to our shareholders definitely help them understand and hopefully, can see that what we're trying to build for DDC over the long run, so that they can, I would better say it, ride through these volatility in the stock price in the near term.
Sure, I bet they appreciate that communication greatly. Now, pivoting over to some of the latest financing and everything, the recent $124 million equity raise came in at $10 a share, which is a nice premium to your current prices there. So, just curious the kind of strategic considerations that went into setting that premium, and does it suggest a strong vote of confidence from investors in DDC's overall direction?
Yeah, I mean, when we priced around, that was about, I would say, 3 weeks ago. It was basically based on a 15-day trailing average closing price for DDC. It so happened to be a fairly nice premium to the closing price at the time. And I think in my opinion, when we put together every fundraising, we're extremely thoughtful and mindful about, what type of investors we are communicating and inviting to bring onto the DDC cap table. And particularly for this round, I myself also became part of the investor group. And so I think that's important in terms of, and it's important for me personally as a founder and CEO, but also it also shows additional vote of confidence and alignment with our investors that I'm also part of the investor group. So I think it's a lot of times when I think about how we present valuations and pricing to investors, I tend to share with them like a longer term view for the company rather than, just focusing on, hey, are you getting in at, 20 cents cheaper or 30 cents cheaper? I think it's important to kind of share with them why I personally also believe this is a good entry point at this cost and what we're trying to build for DDC going forward. And this is just, a starting foundation. And I think having this conviction to also participate in the round helps with that conviction.
Absolutely. A little of your own skin in the game there goes a long way. Now, let's talk about what's happening in the digital asset treasury space or the DAT space. The market seems to have softened since the summer, with that MNAV compressing, and some DATs have even fallen below the 1M or 1X MNAV, sorry, which means they cannot raise the funds to buy Bitcoins without diluting shares. So, how do you think this is going to play out for some of those DAT models?
Yeah, I mean, I would start by saying AmNav is probably not the best metric. I personally believe not the best only metric to kind of look at that. But it is one of the most talked about. But I believe it sometimes hardly gives the full picture if you're trying to understand, what each, DATS or DAT is doing. How do you differentiate one over another? I believe that we are still so early in this journey for all DATs, right? I mean, I know strategy has started this 5 years ago, but if you look at this year, it's really, I would say, year one for all DATs as a concept and as an ecosystem. So I would imagine the way we look at these companies, how we value it, will become a lot more comprehensive and sophisticated over time. But I think for companies, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the MNAF has definitely compressed since August, and it's remained at a more rational and lower level since. And I would anticipate to have more, to see more consolidation in the space, potentially more M&A in the space where maybe companies with higher than 1x MNAF multiple are able to acquire the stack or the entire listed company for other DATs that are trading at significantly below 1x MNAV. That would be something that we expect to see in the coming months.
And so, if DATs won't just be raising funds to buy Bitcoins, what else would they do?
That's a great question. What else? What else are they going to do? So I think for the DATs that already have a scalable or sizable Bitcoin stack on their balance sheets, there's plenty they can do in terms of generating yield, generating cash flow, and creating value for shareholder with their existing stack. And I think for the ones that are still expanding and growing their stack, it'll be important to have a growing, profitable underlying business where, for example, when the capital markets kind of temporarily shut down for DATs to actively raise funds or raise funds at friendlier terms, then they can, kind of like very much like DDC, where we just focus on growing the underlying business, continue to generate cash flow. And if we want, we can continue to stack Bitcoin at our own pace. So I think those are two things that DATs can do when they can't raise
Sure.
funds to buy Bitcoin.
And now, kind of looking forward, what do you think some of the trends are that we should look for, and where do you think the DAT space is going to be a few years from now?
Well, I think 5 years out, if we look at this market, I believe more companies will definitely adopt and add Bitcoins to the treasury, either directly or indirectly. I think each one will have their own preference as to how large their Bitcoin allocation will be. And I would expect there to be a range. Some might prefer to be 100% holdings in Bitcoin, while others might be smaller percentage.
Yeah. Now I want to move over a bit to DDC's Bitcoins there. You guys have rapidly scaled your holdings there from an initial 100 Bitcoin to over 1,000 with a target of 10,000 by the end of 2025. So big increase there. So what's the step-by-step roadmap to hit this ambitious goal? And are there any milestones or triggers for purchases that you guys watch for?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an ambitious and exciting goal for us. It keeps me and the management team super busy. And the way we think about, acquiring Bitcoin, we spend a fair bit of time in terms of how do we differentiate the acquisition of Bitcoin itself. And so, we are actively in different conversations with partners that can help us achieve that goal. And when we think about, from zero to the first thousand, now 1,000 to 10,000 is less of a linear approach. And we do see, these acquisitions and purchases of Bitcoin that could come in bigger chunks. And so, when we think about the roadmap to 10,000 is a combination of raising equity, very much like we just did a few weeks ago, and then acquiring Bitcoin from open market. We also are exploring potential, partnerships with very influential player within the Bitcoin ecosystem that can also sustainably continuously sell Bitcoin to DDC. And finally is working with bigger Bitcoin sellers that are interested in liquidating their position and partnering with someone like someone partnering with a digital asset company, very much like DDC. So those are the three buckets that we think that we are planning right now to get to the 10,000 Bitcoin.
That's exciting. And now we're talking about some partnerships. I know custody is critical for corporate Bitcoin holdings. So can you detail how partnerships with companies like BitGo, Gemini, and MacReport fit into your diversified custody strategy? And what measures you guys put in place to help mitigate risks like hacks and regulatory challenges?
Yeah, I mean, we can go into details in terms of how our custody protocol works for security reasons, but in general, our approach has been to work with institutional grade custody providers like BitGo, Coinbase Custody, Hex Trust. And in fact, if you look at our accumulation path, we started in May with 100 Bitcoin, and then we made a couple purchases. We took the entire month of July to really formulate a partnership network that makes sense and can give us that institutional grade protection for our future holdings. That was the month where we onboarded with a number of large players and significant custodian players in this space for DDC before we resume making a number of purchases in August. And I think there are always risks in terms of different types of custodian method. But once again, for us, our approach has been to diversify and to consistently ensure that we have the right internal security protocol.
Very good. Now, looking ahead, we talked about that 10,000 goal, but how do you envision that Bitcoin accumulation roadmap evolving beyond 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it can always be moving targets, and I think the accumulation, no, it also works within the company. We have this goal, right, which we work diligently in terms of how we source Bitcoin so that we can achieve this target. But I think at the same time, it's definitely a very important exercise that would take into consideration the bigger environment, like the macro environment and the space, how capital markets is behaving, especially towards the DAT sector. And so I think looking ahead, Our primary goal will still be focusing on scaling up our Bitcoin stack because I think, getting to the 10,000 Bitcoin is a very important second milestone for us. Having that scale will enable DDC to do a lot of things to further generate more value for shareholders going forward.
That's awesome. Well, that's all the time I'm taking today. I know we get a chat again in a couple of weeks and we'll be able to dive a bit more into DDC and this exciting strategy. So thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie.